So our first reading continues with that theme that we talked about yesterday. In the church of Thessalonica, this is a church very, very dear to St. Paul's heart. We talked about this in our summer Bible study a little while back, but this is a church that St. Paul was with just for a few weeks, and they just grew so fast. They were just so filled with the Holy Spirit, but then there was persecution, and Paul had to escape in order to survive. And he wasn't able to get back. He was almost like just kind of pushed out of Thessalonica. And so he spent all of these months trying to find out what happened to this church. Imagine a missionary coming into a new territory. He's there just for a couple weeks, and then he's cut off from them. And he's wondering what happened to them. Did they survive? Did they flourish? What's going on? And he has such great joy when he hears about them growing and staying strong in the midst of even the persecution that surrounded them. And he shows his Father's heart in so many ways in this particular letter. And one of the things that he's concerned about is, again, he's concerned about this sort of other outside of Revelation letter that's coming in, pretending to be from St. Paul, saying that, guess what, the day of the Lord has already come. And the way that it's written, we don't have that particular letter, but the way that St. Paul talks about it is that people get sort of thrown into confusion. Some of them fall into despair, but some of them say, well, if God is already coming, I don't really need to prepare anymore. And so what they do is they stop working. But they still need to eat, and they still need to have some sort of material substance. So what they end up doing is they start mooching off of everyone else. And this is that whole idea of some of you are acting like you're busy, but you're really being busybodies. And he talks about here, he says, if anyone was unwilling to work, neither should that one eat. It's not a harsh dictatorship thing, but it's saying, guys, you need to keep living and working with your hands to help your brothers and sisters, instead of saying, well, God's coming, so I'm just not going to do anything anymore. And by the way, can you give me $50? Can you give me $100? Can I have that pizza right over there? That's what was happening. Versus what Paul was saying is, look by my example, that yes, the day of the Lord is coming, but live every single day in this work of love. Which means, in this context, work with your hands to help another. And St. Paul talks about how, even though he had the right as an apostle to receive a just wage, to receive what he said is, I didn't want to be a burden to you. So I worked with my own hands. He was a tent maker. And so he worked in this way so that he wouldn't be any sort of burden, that he wouldn't be mooching off of others. Because he wants to give that example there of saying, use the work, use the time that's been given to you. And maybe it's only 24 hours more, but use that 24 hours in service of your brother and sister. It's kind of like what I think it was C.S. Lewis who talked about during the time of the atomic age, saying, someone asked, well, what would happen, what would you do if you knew that in 24 hours an atomic bomb would be dropped on your city? He'd say, well, I forget if he was maybe playing checkers or something like that. And he's like, well, I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing. I'm going to keep playing checkers. And his whole thing is, I need to live my life each and every day. And if the charity aspect is I'm spending time with this person out of love for them, well, I'm not going to change that. But I'm going to just keep living my life as though it were the last. But in doing that, I actually live more in the present. So, when you think about that, if a cruise missile was going to hit your house in 24 hours, do you remember we had that scare once with our telephones where it was a false alarm, but it was like incoming missile or so, and it caused a lot of panic. I think that was maybe a couple years ago or so. So just imagine if that happened. How would you use, if you had that knowledge, how would you use the time that you have? Would you just kind of give up, or party, or say, well, I got to get all my stuff in, or would you just keep living your life for others? Working with your hands, serving another, spending time with that person that's maybe lonely or afraid or ill or whatever. That's what St. Paul is saying here. He's saying that's the way to live this orderly life. Always have the sense of your final day might be just around the corner. But don't allow that to sort of make you live in a disorderly way. It should fuel you to be all the more present, to treasure what is right in front of you, and to use every single hour of your life using that work for God's greater